Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is David Godwin, and I'm the director of the Southern Fire Exchange program with the University of Florida. And today we'll have a presentation by Jennifer Fawcett, Laurel Kays, and Gary Wood, and they'll be talking about their findings from the 2021 Southeast Prescribed Fire Training Needs Survey. So without further ado, it's now my pleasure to introduce our great speakers today. Jen Fawcett is an Extension Associate in the Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources at North Carolina State University. She serves as the coordinator for the Southeast Regional Partnership for Planning and Sustainability. It's a mouthful. Many folks just call it SURPASS because that's easier. Prescribed Fire Working Group. And she assists in implementing prescribed fire-related education and outreach programs across the Southern region. She currently serves as an advisory board member for the Southern Fire Exchange, our program, thanks Jen, and is the current president of the North Carolina Prescribed Fire Council. Our next speaker is Laurel Kays. Laurel is the Fire Learning Network Manager with the Nature Conservancy. Prior to joining TNC, she worked for NC State University Extension Forestry on wildland fire outreach and education projects across the southeastern United States, including helping to coordinate outreach for the Southern Fire Exchange. She has a diverse background in conservation, outreach, and education that has included work based in Michigan, Wyoming, Tennessee, and North Carolina. And last but not least, Gary Wood. Gary is the Southeastern Regional Coordinator for the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. And he's been in that position after a 31-year career with the North Carolina Forest Service. Gary has served as a county and district ranger, a fire department training specialist, and a wildfire mitigation specialist and FireWise coordinator. Gary also has over 25 years in the volunteer fire service as a North Carolina Fire and Rescue Commission Level 2 certified firefighter. So Gary, Jen, Laurel, welcome. We're glad to have you with us today. Thanks everybody for joining us. And I am looking forward to the presentations, the Q&A, and then I hope you all will join us for that roundtable discussion immediately following the presentations today.
Okay, thank you, David, for the introduction there, and we really appreciate all the work that Southern Fire Exchange and our Joint Fire Science Network through JFSP does to help all of us in the jobs that we carry out. But I'm Gary Wood, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Hopefully, when my co-presenters and I finish today, we will have shared some information with you about the Southeast Prescribed Fire Training Needs Survey report that was done over the past year. Some of the stuff we're going to share with you is give you a little background on why we did the survey. We'll talk about the process that was utilized, as well as discuss the observations that we saw coming out of the responses to the survey, and then the recommendations that were put together with a work group. And hopefully we'll be able to share some of those next steps as we move forward with improving our ability to get more prescribed fire training out in our region. Next slide, please, Laurel. A little background for those. I know we've got some folks joining that are not from the South, but give you a little bit of an insight into kind of why it was important that we looked at prescribed fire in the South and doing a training needs survey. But controlled burning has been part of the culture here in the Southland since well before the time when European settlers set foot on its soil. Our Native Americans utilized fire to open up forests for easier travel, for better opportunities for hunting, for agricultural purposes, as well as part of their culture to sustain the land that sustains them. When the European settlers arrived, this was a new practice that they quickly learned the importance of and found out how important it was upon the landscape, especially protection of their homes and their communities. We continue today to learn from our indigenous partners and their traditional knowledge that's passed down, as well as the important aspect of science and research. That has been very critical to understanding the need for frequent fire. And if you take a look at some of the stuff that has been shared over the Southern Fire Exchange webinar process, you'll see there's a lot of science, a lot of research that has gone into that. But that helps us better understand the importance and need for fire upon the unique ecosystems that we have here to maintain the many plant and animal species that benefit from frequent fire. In the mid-1920s, there was a pause in fire upon the landscape that quickly showed a decline in the quail populations and plant communities dependent upon frequent fire. And Herbert Stoddard was commissioned to do work in northern Florida and South Georgia and identified the importance and need of frequent fire on the ecosystem. So then, after we were told we needed frequent fire, between 1928 and 31, we had the Dixie Crusaders that traveled across the South evangelizing against burning of woodlands and preaching the evils of woods burning to over 3 million people. And then this later set the stage for Smokey Bear's prevention work to stress the importance and need to protect our natural resources. So still today, we have work that we have to do in outreach and education to prove the importance and benefits of prescribed fire on the landscapes and the science and research that plays a critical role in that. That's how we're able to, on average, burn anywhere between 5 and 6 million acres annually. And a little bit of information as far as who's doing the burning. It's done by private landowners, Department of Defense, federal land management agencies, our tribal partners, state and local agencies, a lot of state forestry, state parks, state fish and game, natural heritage programs, and even a lot of local burning with some of the watershed managers. We've got some fire departments and city park staff doing prescribed burning, universities, as well as many NGOs, as well as consulting foresters and private industry, or private contractors that do burning, as well as our forest industry folks. So with a rapid housing and population growth in the South, burners have to be well trained to conduct the burns and have minimal impact to the public. So for us to be able to do that and to be able to increase our ability to put fire on the landscape, we've got to be able to efficiently train new burners and enhance the skills of those that are already trained to get more acres done. So that's why training is critical to us here to be able to restore our landscapes and maintain them, reduce risk to communities, as well as lessen risk to wildfire responders. Next slide, please, Laurel. So during this webinar, we want you to think about how this training relates to your prescribed fire training needs or the program that you're involved in. You can use that chat function to share some of the common similarities or differences, or how you might have broke some of the barriers down. But when we look at our current state of training, we've got the gambit of NWCG courses that are being conducted by primarily our state and federal agencies, oftentimes taught collaboratively through academies. Most of the time, it's just agency-specific type training. We do have some non-governmental organizations that are doing some NWCG courses as well. Doing NWCG courses. So then we look at non-NWCG courses. These are conducted oftentimes by states that don't follow the NWCG prescribed burn curriculum. We've got NGOs as well as prescribed fire councils, prescribed burn associations, extension, and others that are doing training on non-NWCG classes to help enhance burner skills. And then most of our states have a certified burn manager program. And this is usually state forestry is conducting this and maintains control over that certification process. And then, we have quite a bit of virtual training that's taken place thanks to what has been brought to us with COVID. Next slide. So a little bit about why we did a survey in the Northeast. The regional coordinator, Larry Mastic, there that I work with, They conducted a survey over their 20 states, looking primarily at the NWCG curriculum, and had questions that they posed for that, and they received 171 responses. These were compiled, and in their findings, they showed that prescribed fire had a low priority among a lot of folks there. They did identify not enough courses, wildfire requirements in this prescribed burning task book system was a barrier for some of the folks to be able to move forward, and just difficult for anybody that was a non-agency person to get training. They put together their work group and came up with some recommendations to offer more courses, be able to have a better knowledge of when classes were going to be taught, increase some of the field training, hands-on type training, and the way they wanted to kind of do this was thought about putting in some demonstration areas, or having some areas they maintained frequently with fire as demonstration sites, and used it for training as well. One of the things that they came up with was the need for trying to hire somebody to help coordinate a training approach across their region. And so they were able to hire Zach Pruzak as their regional training coordinator. And they also identified the need to collaborate with us in the Southeast, because we do conduct so much prescribed burning and so much prescribed fire training. Next slide, please. So the purpose of doing this survey, after Larry in the Northeast did their survey, he and I were chatting, and we found out that there would be a good opportunity for us to do this in the Southeast, and that we needed to try to work so that we could collaboratively cross boundary, do some stuff. And he agreed to let us utilize the survey questions that they used. And then we also identified that there were some other questions that we needed to put in there that will be discussed a little bit later. But we wanted to look at the purpose for why we did this. The practitioners have got to be able to get better trained. We know we got to increase the pace and scale of training that folks are getting, and improve the quality and the opportunities for training. And we know there's gaps and barriers, but we needed to know what they were so we could address them and figure out how best to overcome those barriers and get that done. And so that was really the whole purpose behind this survey. Next slide. So some of the development and information that we looked at, it was distributed out across a large group of partners that I'm going to let Laurel talk about now. But I think, David, you're going to put some information in there in the chat a little bit later on, so y'all keep an eye on that.
Thanks, Gary. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts of how we distributed, developed the survey, and then how we analyzed some of the data because of how much response we did end up getting back. So like Gary mentioned, this went out to quite a few people. We distributed it in January of 2021. Those are just a couple partners on the screen that it went out through. And we did encourage everyone who received it, the groups who received it, to please share it as widely as possible, to share it with other groups, to share it with individuals that they knew, and to just get it out to as many folks as possible. And one of the kind of downsides of that small caveat is that we don't actually have any idea of kind of a response rate for the survey. We know how much data we got back, and it was great, and it was a really, really overwhelming response compared to what we were expecting. But we don't know how many people saw the survey versus how many people responded, because we did just sort of send it out to people, and they sent it out to people, and we did not keep a record of that. It replicated some of the Northeast questions that Gary was talking about, specific questions about NWCG courses and qualifications and concerns related to that. And we also added a section specifically about some of those non-NWCG trainings, like certified burner courses, smoke management courses, that are so essential to a lot of our non-suppression agencies, particularly wildlife agencies, state parks, and private landowners. In terms of what that looked like, This is from a Word document. This isn't what it looked like in the actual survey platform, but just to give you an idea of kind of functionally how we differentiated between NWCG versus non-NWCG questions. Folks had a set of questions that everybody answered, and then they were prompted to respond whether they were interested in NWCG courses. If they said yes, they saw a suite of questions specifically related to NWCG courses. If they said no, then they skipped that section. They didn't see those questions or respond to them. Same thing with non-NWCG courses. They were shown a question if they were interested in non-NWCG courses. You can see we gave them some examples to just clarify what we meant by that. If they were interested in those courses, if they clicked yes, they saw that next suite of questions. And if they didn't, they did not see those questions. And so we didn't get any kind of responses from folks that weren't necessarily actually interested in those courses. The data was collected through a survey platform called Qualtrics. Not too much to say about that, but it is very convenient in that it auto-generates a lot of really helpful graphs. We didn't end up using all of those for the final report, but some of them we did. And like I mentioned, we were really overwhelmed by the response that we got from folks. We honestly anticipated that we would get a couple hundred responses, write up a little report, and that would kind of be it. But we ended up getting nearly 1,000 individual people participating, got just over 2,000 individual comments on all of the questions in the survey, which was really exciting, but also really overwhelming in terms of how to actually sift through that data and come up with observations and recommendations that were well organized and that were based in the data that we had. So we used a method called content analysis. We sometimes refer to it as coding, to organize and analyze all of that comment data and make sure that that comment data was being taken into account in an organized way, in addition to the multiple choice data that we collected. And so to give you an idea of how we did that, we put all of the comments into a spreadsheet according to the question they were responding to, and then we went through and what we call coded them. So we looked at each comment, looked at the kind of subject, broad subject that it was referring to, and put that next to the comment. Comments could have more than one codes, could be referring to more than one subject. And then we counted them all up according to the different questions, according to the overall survey, according to non-NWCG and NWCG questions. And we looked at kind of some of the common themes that were really rising to the top and frequently mentioned in these different comments to start coming up with some of these observations and recommendations. And I'll note here, just FYI for this screenshot, the NWCG and non-NWCG totals don't add up to the number of comments in the total survey because there were some of those questions that everybody saw that weren't specific to NWCG versus non. And I'll just cover quickly a couple of the kind of demographics of who we got to respond. Again, we were really pleased with the amount of responses we got. We had 955 individual people participate. These graphs have different totals because folks could choose more than one option. So if they were responding to which state they worked in, they could choose more than one state if they worked in more than one state. And we did get, quite a few folks from Florida and Georgia particularly responding. But even for those folks in Kentucky and Arkansas who had relatively small percentages, that was still about 15 people for both Kentucky and Arkansas. So not necessarily a huge sample size, but we did get substantial participation from every state in the region, as well as folks who work at that kind of regional level. We also got really great representation of people kind of from across affiliations and types of roles. We got a lot of private landowners, which we were really pleased about. We actually ended up getting more private landowners that responded to the survey than federal agency personnel. We got quite a few state agency folks, and we kind of expected that. One of the things that we see as room for improvement and is definitely included in the recommendations as something to address is that tribal folks, students, extension folks had really low representation, and we were hoping to get some more responses from them. So those are definitely groups that looking forward maybe need to be reached out to more, need to do some additional digging to see what issues they're facing that may or may not be the same as the folks who responded to the survey in larger numbers. We were also really pleased that the vast majority, almost 60% of people who responded were actually managers and practitioners. As a largely desk-bound person myself, we're not people who were sitting at a desk all day like me. largely were people who are out in the field actually taking these trainings, implementing fire, teaching these trainings as the bulk of their job duties. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jen to talk a little bit more in depth about some of the results and some of the larger scale observations that we put together from those. Jen, you're muted.
Thanks, Laurel. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to talk about the actual survey results and some observations that we made about those results. I'm not going to cover everything from the survey, but if you're interested, you can refer back to the document if you want to see the full report and all of the questions that were included. So as Laurel mentioned, participants were asked to respond to the set of survey questions for the category of training that they were interested, either NWCG, non-NWCG, or both. So in some cases, respondents did choose to answer both sets of questions. So first, I'm going to cover some of the NWCG responses. 80% of the survey participants identified themselves as being interested in taking the NWCG education courses and answered this set of questions that I'm about to show you. So as was already mentioned, the purpose of the survey was to assess kind of the state of prescribed fire training in the Southeast. It was intended to identify the barriers, the deficiencies, the areas for improvement in the availability, type, and quality of the training delivery. So our survey questions kind of focused around those topics. This one that you can see here, this is specific to the training courses. And to better understand where the major course bottlenecks exist, we provided the statement that said, please select the NWCG courses that you're going to need to maintain your qualifications, but are difficult to obtain. So courses specifically that are needed, but hard to get. And so then we provided a drop-down list of 22 courses, which you can see in the graphic here. I don't expect you to be able to read those, but we provided, I just wanted you to see kind of in the graphic, the diversity of the responses there. So that list of 22 options, and they could also either select an other, there was an option for other, where they could essentially fill in their own response. So on this graphic, all 22 of the course options were selected at least 40 times. So you can see, they're all needed and all hard to get, but to varying degrees. So I did want to highlight the top 5 courses that people need in order to maintain their qualifications, but are the top 5 that are the most difficult to obtain also. And these are RX 301, prescribed fire implementation, RX 410, smoke management techniques, RX 341, prescribed fire plan preparation, RX 310, introduction to fire effects, and S 390, introduction to wildland fire behavior calculation. So some of those, if you work in the NWCG world, may look familiar to you. Maybe you're also having difficulty accessing those courses. But those were the kind of the top 5. And why there's a variety of courses that people are having trouble with. These in particular seem to be causing some bottlenecks. I also wanted to point out that a quarter of the respondents for this NWCG section, they were working towards qualifications for either Burn Boss 1 or Burn Boss 2. And then another 14% on top of that were working towards some sort of NWCG qualification, such as RXV3, Engine Boss, Firing Boss, etc. So when you add those up, almost half of the respondents are working towards qualifications for positions that are already capacity limited, but they're having trouble getting these courses. So that's something for those of you who are putting on NWCG courses just to keep in mind. Next slide. When we asked the question, are there different challenges in achieving your qualifications for the first time compared to maintaining those qualifications, 34% of people said that they did have different challenges. But a majority of people said the challenges weren't any different once they had gotten their original qualification. So we provided an opportunity for them to kind of elaborate on that and to provide any comments on the challenges that they faced. And so some of those comments that people provided included challenges such as access to training, lack of time, issues related to achieving NWCG requirements, and especially those requiring wildfire experience. That came up quite a bit, that people who worked in prescribed fire but didn't necessarily have an agency or didn't go out on wildfires, it was very difficult for them to get those qualifications for wildfire experience when they didn't have opportunities to do that. Several comments also mentioned that it's difficult to perform and achieve required qualifications to advance in the prescribed burn requirements while also trying to complete other training needed for career advancement. So some people, this was not their full-time job. Next slide. Now I'm going to go over some of the non-NWCG results. So these are people that are interested in training that was not affiliated with NWCG. 60% of the survey participants were interested in taking non-NWCG courses. So similar to the question that we asked for the NWCG section, we asked what types of prescribed fire training courses do you need but are difficult to obtain? So this one, there were far fewer options, but so you can see here, we provided several choices. Field-based operational training was noted as the greatest need, followed by the certified burn manager course. I did want to note here that for the certified burn manager, more than half of the respondents, 54%, indicated that they were already a certified prescribed burn manager in their state, but this was still identified as one of the top needs for those people who were either not yet certified at all, or some states require a continuing education or a recertification course, and they also found those hard to obtain. And several comments stated that if the course is only offered once or twice a year and they're not able to attend, they have to wait until the next year to take the course. Fire weather tools and smoke management courses were also identified as difficult to obtain, but to a lesser degree. And then there were, again, we provided an option for other people could provide their own comments, and some examples of those included various NWCG courses, smoke management, burn plan development and writing, and fire ecology and fire effects. And then some people said they didn't have any courses that were difficult to obtain. So for those people not interested in taking NWCG courses, the greatest need really is that hands-on training in the field. So more learn and burn events, field training through prescribed burn associations or other types of field days where people can get that hands-on experience may help to alleviate some of those bottlenecks. Next slide. And then similarly to the NWCG, we asked, are there different challenges in achieving your qualifications for the first time compared to maintaining those qualifications? 29% of people said that they did have different challenges in achieving their qualifications the first time. And those included, the challenges included access to training, lack of time, issues related to NWCG requirements, and then 71% of people did not face any challenges in maintaining their qualifications. Next slide. Okay, so for these next two slides, the results are combined for both the NWCG and the non-NWCG survey respondents because they were so very similar, as you can see here, if you can distinguish between those colors. So we asked them what their preferred type of training format is. So this survey was conducted right in the middle of COVID. There were definitely more virtual courses taking place at that time than there were previously. So we were curious kind of about how people felt about this. Did they like the virtual courses? Did they want to go back to in person? So we asked both NWCG and non-NWCG the same question. And as you can see, both are very similar. And respondents found that a hybrid approach, so hybrid being kind of this combination of virtual and in-person options, was preferred by the majority of all of the respondents. So no matter if they were courses related to NWCG or maybe the certified burner courses or other types of non-NWCG courses. So in-person training was the second most preferred, followed by a virtual format as the least preferred. Next. Okay, so then we're also curious. So people that responded that they were interested in either the hybrid or the virtual course then got asked this kind of follow-up question, which was, how would you like the virtual portion of the courses to be offered? And as you can see here, a combination of asynchronous and synchronous received the highest response, but again, very similar between non-NWCG and NWCG respondents. And we asked them to select one of the provided options. Asynchronous training here is referring to a training where participants can participate and access materials at any time. It doesn't require an instructor to be synced at the same time. They can do it in the evenings or whenever they want, wherever they want. And then synchronous in this slide is referring to those types of trainings where the participants must join or access materials at a designated time. So whether it's through an online course or a webinar or a video training or something like that at the same time as the instructor. Next. So now I just wanted to go over some observations based on all of the results that are in the report and that you just heard. And these were combined down into kind of the top 5 observations that came up a lot in the comments and in the responses. This first one was related to training, and that was primarily that people were having difficulty accessing the training. There's not enough training opportunities. Those that do exist aren't sufficiently advertised according to the survey. And then also that certain NWCG courses and the state certified burn manager courses in particular seem to represent the training bottlenecks based on those slides that you saw when we asked people what are the most difficult courses for you to obtain. Next. Our next observation was regarding capacity. And I did want to mention too, the quotes that you see here are actual quotes from our survey respondents. Related to capacity, there's just not enough capacity. And I don't think any of this is surprising necessarily to any of us or probably to any of you, but we just made the observation that from the survey results, there are not enough qualified personnel to offer the training, particularly those hands-on opportunities and mentoring of novice burners, and that there's more personnel in need of training than there are actually qualified personnel available to conduct the training. From a qualification standpoint, they're difficult to navigate. The process for achieving, maintaining, and progressing through your qualifications, especially those in NWCG, might be confusing and challenging for people. You saw in the slides before, people are having problems just getting them in the first place and then later maintaining them for some people. And this is especially true for those agencies that don't have fire suppression responsibilities. Again, there were several comments that people made that if their agency didn't have fire suppression responsibilities, it was very difficult for them to get those, especially in their task books, to get those wildfire checked off. Next slide. Okay, and then differing agency guidelines and policies. Some people found that the differing training and qualification requirements across agencies and organizations actually inhibited collaborative training. We had asked a question about collaboration, and that came up that the different requirements did not actually allow for different types of collaborative training, including hands-on training. So some MOUs might be helpful for something regarding that one, but the different training requirements that was a bottleneck for some people. And then finally, the interest in diversifying training formats. There are questions about the virtual versus hybrid versus in-person. There was a significant interest in the virtual and hybrid training opportunities for both NWCG and non-NWCG trainings. This one, I think, was a little bit surprising for some of us. The hybrid training by far was the most interesting. I think people now that there were some comments, people can conduct it on their own time, and we've been at it for 2 years now, where people are getting pretty good at doing things online. And so having that as an option for people, especially for agencies that have limited travel budgets, this might be an approach that people would potentially look more into. Next. So now I'm going to actually pass it off to Gary, and he's going to talk about some of the commonalities between the results that you just heard from the Southeast and what the Northeast found in their survey. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. And if you'll monitor your chat there, David's going to put a link in there for you that you can access one of the Southern Fire Exchange webinars that was conducted last week off of their YouTube channel that'll share a little bit of information about this commonalities as well. But as you heard what our observations were, difficulty in knowing when classes were being taught, lack of advertising courses, making it aware to everybody. So the old adage of if you don't know, you can't go, found true in both surveys. And then not enough courses were held or sessions held. They found out that you've got to put classes on more frequently so that people will have more access to getting those classes. The coordination across agencies was challenging, and that was one of the things that we found out, particularly with the NWCG courses, that working across the agencies, sometimes it was very difficult in making those connections. And of course, private landowners, non-governmental organizations, non-agency personnel were not equally being able to have access to some of the training that they needed. And that it was really, really difficult for them oftentimes to get some of the higher level, more intense training classes, for that simple reason. And then we've talked, of course, about the training formats. There was some discussion in both surveys in that as far as diversifying the delivery systems there. And then updating some of the fire material. People were really wanting to see a lot of the suppression focused stuff and some of the training dropped, and get more into talking about fire modeling or fuel modeling, fuel loadings, the smoke model training, etc., that would help them up their game when it came to doing burning. And then just simply the virtual components was identified as being a cost saver, and being able to not have to leave, be gone out of the work unit for a week at a time, when they could get real high quality training and be right there at the same time in their work unit and not be gone. It could be contributing. Next slide. So we've talked about the observations that we found. We put together a group and came up with some recommendations. This was a true collaborative effort among diverse folks involved in training across the region. And some of the recommendations that came out that we saw was, we knew that we've got to do a better job at making courses known when they're going to be done, having more classes available more than once a year, and increase those training opportunities, particularly in the hands-on stuff. People wanted that hand-holding and being able to have someone mentor them in field operations and conducting burns. We also know that we identified in those observations that we've got to streamline the process for achieving those NWCG qualifications. And where that limits us at is in agencies accepting one another's qualifications. And there's a lot of people that are qualified to burn that may not hold a red card, but they can't go burn on another agency because they don't have that. So the biggie was, like Jen said, people that work in an agency without fire suppression responsibilities, they're having a hard time achieving the instant commander type 4 requirement in a task book to let them work through and get their prescribed fire burner and burn manager qualifications. We know that we've got to develop more hybrid and more virtual training opportunities. You know, we learned through COVID that we can successfully conduct and do things and not have to necessarily be there one face to face with one another. And then we know that we've got to be able to identify and have some hard discussions about policies and other factors that present those barriers, just like we talked about not accepting one another's qualifications. Some of that stuff could be worked out with MOUs or some tweaks in annual operating plan conversations and language. We know we've got to work more cross-boundary and cross-agency. And if we're going to increase our scale and our capacity, we've got to continue to maintain the great working relationships we already have, but enhance and improve those and look for additional relationships as well. As was mentioned by Laurel, we found out that we've got to improve our coordination and communication, you know, with underrepresented groups, including our tribal partners, our underserved landowners, also universities and students. We've got to do a better job at partnerships with them. And most importantly, if we're going to up our game, we've got to be able to have consistent, dedicated funding just for prescribed fire. Next slide. So some of the actions that have already been implemented as a result of the survey, some of these may have actually been initiated a little bit prior to the release of the survey and the final report, but you know, positive change is being made. Jen, Laurel, and I did a lot of little short presentations and updates, informing folks in various different work groups on the progress as we work through the process of getting the findings of the result, or the findings and the results compiled in the final report. And that allowed some folks to get their wheels turning and thinking about some of the things that needed to be done. Of course, you know, other priorities have impacted some of our major movement with getting next steps rolled out, but there are actions in place, and we're identifying how to initiate those items and make sure that things get rolling, but sometimes moving a little slower than we would like for them to. When we look at the first bullet here, the Fawcett, the Southern Area Wildland Fire Interagency Training Working Team, they have increased their collaboration and their coordination across agencies, and they've actually created a website for providing a central location to advertise upcoming training course announcements. This work is in progress. It was just released very recently, but this is going to be a big increase in the awareness of training opportunities that may be available. And one thing that this group has done, the Southern Area Fire Interagency Wildland Fire Training Working Team, is they've increased their communications amongst agencies and partners and stakeholders big time, and that's going to be a big payoff for us. The state fire chiefs had some discussion. They looked at the course that Fred Turk, the folks up in Virginia, put together for their certified burn manager course. Fred's been successfully carrying that course out virtually, and there's been a discussion about possibly looking at developing a generic region-wide certified burn manager course that could be given generic, weather's weather, sometimes fuel's fuel, a few little different intricate changes depending on some of the parts in the region, but hold a generic course, and then instructors could have a set time and host a webinar, host a Zoom meeting, and go over state specific requirements, particularly with their smoke liability law language and requirements in that. So that's one thing that's being discussed. Shan Kamick worked with us on this progress. She's with Georgia DNR. She was able to take some information that we shared with her and discuss it with her leadership. And hopefully some policy changes are coming about that will help them better justify some of their funding for prescribed fire training. Thomas Crate also worked with us on this project of developing recommendations. He presented information to the North Carolina Fire Environment Working Committee, and that resulted in them making plans to offer some higher level training courses during 2022 that aren't required by some of the folks on the committee, but they saw the need for it, and they're making that change to address that higher level training. The National Prescribed Fire Training Center recently held a line officer training course at administrative agency personnel, and information about what was found in the survey was shared with them. Greg Sermon had worked with us in this as well. He shared it with the folks, and there were a lot of the folks that were surprised that their people were not getting the training they wanted or the amount of training that they wanted. So it was a good opportunity to make those folks that are responsible for their employees getting training to know that they need more, they want more, and now we just got to make sure we fund it and get it for them as well. I had opportunity to do a presentation to give the results of the survey to the 13 state foresters here across the Southeast, and they really liked hearing what came out of it, particularly when it was around the virtual part of it. They recognized the importance of being able to get more training done that way at a cost savings for their agency by not having to send personnel away from their work unit, pay for lodging, pay for meals, etc., and take them away from some of their normal training, some of their normal work responsibilities. I mean, I can recall having been a supervisor, with a new employee coming on, and it's like you never saw them because they were gone for weeks at the time to training courses somewhere. And so this is a cost savings, and many of the state foresters are talking with their state training officers and their fire chiefs about implementing more and more of the opportunities for virtual training courses as well. Next slide. Okay, we got an opportunity for you all to give us a little bit of feedback, and use your chat function down at the bottom. And we'd like for you to enter any actions that you or your agency or organization have taken as a result of this survey and the findings in the final report, and or what steps do you plan to take regarding training after today's webinar. And that will be a good tool for us to gauge some feedback for us as the presenters to know some of the things moving forward or things that have already resulted from the survey. Okay, next slide, please. So what are our next steps? Our Southeastern Regional Strategy Committee with cohesive strategy, we're committed to identifying the priorities from these findings and recommendations to address and work to promote changes to break these identified barriers to training for our prescribed fire community. The survey process was a collaborative effort, and so we recognize that moving forward to be successful, we've got to keep that collaborative approach. among the many stakeholders and partners in our diverse prescribed fire community that we have here in the Southeast. A lot of folks use or have their hands in prescribed fire in the region and are involved at various different levels. We just want to make sure we get the right people in the right places that can make the best influence to change and hopefully implement some of these recommendations or help us move the needle forward. So you see some proposed actions that we've identified to help bring folks together that will help lead this effort. When we look at these, we're putting together the prescribed fire coordination work group that processed and went through the survey to help identify some of these needs. We definitely will be collaborating with a group that has already been formed before we did the survey, the Southeast Virtual Fire Training Working Group, to help us move things forward and figure out how we can move things forward with the virtual training component recommendations. We'll continue to coordinate and collaborate with the Northeast Regional Strategy Committee. Larry and I work very well across boundaries, as well as with our counterpart, Katie Lighthall in the West. We got a good team that we work together and share information. So we're going to continue to collaborate, coordinate, and move stuff across boundaries. And then we'll continue to work with the Southern Area Wildland Fire Interagency Training Working Team and the GATOR, which the GATOR is just simply the Geographic Area Training Representative. They're based out of U.S. Forest Service Region 8. And then we'll continue to work with our prescribed fire councils across the region to figure out opportunities to meet the needs specific for their memberships. You know, what can be done better for those folks that aren't looking for NWCG classes? How can we better meet those needs and provide that information with them? And we'll do that working through Mark Melvin and his group with Coalition of Prescribed Fire Councils and a regional group that's already been formed. And then one of the things that that has begun that's not very widely known, but Larry and I have worked on trying to develop some proposals to present to the National Wildfire Coordinating Group, Fuels Management Committee, and their Fire Use Subcommittee on changing some of those requirements in the position task books, as well as expanding, you know, the position task books. One thing that wasn't widely known is there's actually a RXB3 position task book, but the only real federal land management agency that was recognizing and using it was Department of Interior, Bureau of Land Management. And it was primarily for their folks to be able to go and burn ditch banks or small piles. And so we've looked at that, we've made some recommendations, and we're also thinking about trying to figure out a way to possibly create a RXB4, RXB5, to where we can get people the training they need. They're not going to need to be wildland fire suppression specialists to be able to tote a drip torch and put fire on the landscape. So that's what we're trying to do. And, you know, looking at the timing of when all this has taken place, with all the funding potentially coming out of the infrastructure bill, addressing the wildfire problem, and a lot of look at fuels management, which we know prescribed fire is the cheapest tool that we've got to manage fuels. We hope that that we'll be able to increase the training, to build the capacity that we're going to have to fully utilize the funds that may come available, and be able to get fire on our landscapes, which we know is important and needed. Also help reduce that risk to the communities that we have, as well as reducing the response component of it when we do have folks responding to wildfires, hopefully lessen the risk that they're exposed to from having heavy fuels there. And so those are some of the next steps. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more coming out of it. As Laurel said, this was a very overwhelming project. We had no idea that we'd get 955 responses, but I will tell y'all, and I've got to take time to do this. I always do. I got to give credit because we would never have gotten to where we're at if it wasn't for Laurel and Jen and the work that they did. And they have educated this old forest ranger on a lot of different things. And we've got a good report, and we hope that it can move some needles forward as we look at increasing our training across the region and beyond. So David, I think it's time now to turn things over to you. I believe that was hopefully our last slide that I had noted.
All right, Gary, thanks. And thanks, Jen and Laurel. If y'all just joined us or joined us late into the webinar, that was Jennifer Fawcett with NC State University, Laurel Case with the Nature Conservancy, and Gary Wood with the Southeastern Regional Cohesive Strategy. And they're providing some background and different additional information on the Southeast Prescribed Fire Training Needs survey and subsequent report. And we've got links in the chat for a number of the resources that they described or shared, including links directly to the report itself, and also a shorter executive summary of the report, if that's what you want to dive into. So you can find those there. Additionally, there are links on the screen. Before we see if we have additional questions, I do want to make sure to remind you that they have their email addresses on the screen. So if you have questions after today, if you can't continue the conversation immediately after this in that roundtable discussion, then go ahead and shoot them an email, make note of those email addresses, and connect with them. I know Jen and Gary and Laurel are all really invested in this project and interested in continuing to move forward and make a difference in the region so that we can help address some of the needs described. If you have questions, please go ahead and put them either in the chat or in the Q&A at this time, and we will let Gary or Laurel or Jen try and get to them. So I'm going to hop over here and see if we have anything in the Q&A now. I don't see any yet. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and put them in. One of the things that y'all mentioned, you talked about people raised, oh, here's a question. Let's get right to it. And the comment, oh, it's a long one. Said, all right, the comment says, I work with private landowners, assisting them to get federal cost share assistance. Many have tried to get into the certified burner class in North Carolina, and in the past haven't been able to get in. Several individuals have been working with a program for education specialists. During COVID, they taught in person, small classes in pole barns and in the field, training many of my landowners and following through to signing them off during their burn. It'd be great to have more of these kinds of positions available. Yeah, so do y'all want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can throw back on that one. And hey, Laura, it's just good to see you participating. One of the things that we know some of the state foresters are trying to do is trying to figure out a way they can get more of those certified burn manager classes done. Definitely the discussion around virtual is going to be a big benefit if they can figure out and take that on. But as far as getting more positions available, you know, that's where you're going to have that dedicated funding to make this work. And, you know, I mentioned the infrastructure bill. There's a ton of money there that could do that, but we're not sure what kind of sideboards are going to fall in the guidelines on how that's going to be spent. So a lot of that is still waiting to be trickled out and come down. But, you know, looking at grant opportunities, trying to figure out where you could divert agency funds and pick folks up that could do that for you would be a huge benefit. But we can just keep our fingers crossed and hope that that we can get some more opportunities virtually to be able to do that and get some people on the ground to help with that hands-on one-on-one mentoring.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add really, except for that I agree, Laura, definitely more of those would be available. Don had put into the chat that there are a few more in North Carolina, at least some certified burner training already scheduled for later this year. And I think having that hands-on, so in a lot of states in the South, there are these checkoff burns. So after you go through the course, and then you still have to do a checkoff burn. And so having more opportunities for that as well, like you had put into your chat, you know, have some of those smaller in-person hands-on training opportunities for landowners. I think I agree with you, would be beneficial for sure.
All right, at this point, I don't see any more questions coming in through the Q&A or in the chat. So what I think we should do is go ahead and wrap up this part of our program today. And then for everyone who's interested in jumping over to this roundtable to continue the conversation, I put that link in the chat window. And so I hope you'll follow up. It's another Zoom window. It's going to jump us out of Zoom webinar and into a Zoom meeting, so we can you'll have the option to unmute and go right in and chat directly, talk directly with everybody else who's on there, and with Gary and Laurel and Jen. So at this point, as we wrap this up, this will be the end of our recorded portion of the meeting today. Gary, Laurel, Jen, do y'all have any final comments that you would like to close on?
I'll go first just so I can jump over to the other meeting, but thank you everybody for joining. We would love to have you in the other Zoom room to have actual discussions with you all and hear what sorts of challenges or opportunities you all face regarding prescribed fire training as well. So I'll see you in the other room.
And I'll go and then let Gary close us out, because he's always good at that. Just a really sincere thank you. I know a lot of you on here were people who took the survey or shared it with folks. Huge thank you to all of you. Like we've alluded to multiple times, we really did not expect this amount of interest in this, and we're thrilled that we got it, and that it's a platform to be able to hopefully make some good changes and improve this situation for all of us across the region.
And I'll go ahead and close us out here. First and foremost, David, thank you for all you do at Southern Fire Exchange and for giving us this opportunity to participate in the webinar on the survey report. Thank you to all the folks out there, like Laurel said, that took and participated in the survey report and provided comment in there. It's funny, I've got to mention this. We actually had a couple of people that put their email address in there, put their phone number, and said, "Hey, I'd like to ask you this." And I actually contacted them, and they were like, "I had no idea anybody would ever respond to me." So trust me, we analyzed and went through every one of those responses, and we tried to capture what the true issues are out there. And we encourage you to take the findings in the report, look for every opportunity that you can to work smarter, work better with one another, make it truly the all hands, all lands component of cohesive strategy, and let's continue to burn and get fire upon the landscape like it's needed. So that's all I've got. David, we'll turn it back to you, and I'll be leaving, joining over with Jen in the other room as well.